Hello and welcome. Our topic today is sound and transformation. My guest is Jill Purce, the author of The Mystic Spiral, a former research fellow in the biophysics department of King's College, the University of London, where she worked with Maurice Wilkins, the Nobel laureate physicist, biophysicist, who is one of the discoverers of the DNA molecule. And Jill has also been the general editor of the Arts and Imagination series published by Thames and Hudson. Welcome, Jill.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to have you here. You've been traveling around the world for the last 5, maybe even 10 years now, doing workshops on sound and transformation, a subject that you've studied extensively, integrating the Buddhist tradition from Tibet and many other traditions that have used sound as a focal point for transformation. And yet your work originally began in the area of the visual arts. Your book, The Mystic Spiral, traces the pattern of the spiral in science, the DNA molecule, the double helix, and also in various mystical traditions. Let's start by sort of tracing your journey.
Yes, my journey began very visually, and I was always struck by pattern. One of the features of everything that I've done has been to be inspired by the connections between the similarities of pattern in different fields. And my starting point in this case was water. I was fascinated by the movement of water. And for very long periods I would sit by the side of a river or a stream looking at the, well, first of all, the thing which struck me most of all was that water has no form. It has no color, unless it's interrupted. As soon as it's interrupted by any kind of resistance, then this formless, seamless substance turns around itself and around its own center, separates from itself and takes on form for the duration of that interruption or that resistance.
Ripples.
Ripples, streams of eddies, vortices, and so forth. And it seemed to me that this was not just something in water, but it was a principle of the universe itself, that in the universe there is energy, and energy by some kind of resistance then, and only then, brings about form in the world. And so I decided to, by the particular form that I saw in water became the inspiration for me, the spiral. And I decided that it would be a very useful question to ask of the universe, and to take this form and see what kind of answers it produced. Why is it that we have spirals around us in nature? So firstly, it was clear to me that this had not been asked in this way. So I decided to go to all the the professors of botany and the professors of physiology and of astronomy, and see what they had to say. And in every case, for example, I remember vividly asked the professor of botany, I said, how is it that so many spirals grow in this form, and what can we understand from this? And he looked very puzzled, and he said, this was in 1969 or something. He said, well, we don't ask these kind of questions. And I realized that actually this was the kind of question that one needed to ask. And so I decided that this would be my task.
Many, many people were struck by the way you assembled all of these images in your book, The Mystic Spiral, and we could look at galaxies, we could look at seashells, and see the same pattern, as if it were an archetype that was manifesting itself.
Yes, this is exactly what it seems to be. It seems to be a record of a process in time. All these forms, whether you see it in the galaxies or the shells or the rotation of subatomic particles or the great rotations of the groups of galaxies or anything in between, it seems that it's like a record of the natural processes just caught in a moment of time, and each object has its own time. Some are very fast, some are very slow, some you can watch coming and going, some take thousands and billions of years, but they're all there, caught.
So you move somehow from the study of the spiral as a form, a visual form in nature and in art, to looking at the process, I suppose, of creating vibrations, which is what sound is, and the relationship between vibration and form.
Well, one of the things which has preoccupied me, both in my work with the spiral, but also with the work in the sound, two questions really. One was, how does form come into being? This is something that I've found very important question. How does form come into being? And then my other passion was to go home. And the more I began to study how form comes into being and the whole process, I realized that all the traditions understand that our return to the divine, to the source where we come from, is the same as the same path that we took when we came into being in the first place. And so if you can understand how matter comes into being, how form comes into being, then there is something there, some key which enables you to go home, to undo the process, to transform matter back into spirit. And this applied to my research in the spiral. And I discovered that not only did we find these spirals around us in nature, but that all, or many descriptions of our journey, the return journey to God, were ones which were spiral journeys, the turning around, climbing the mountain, getting to the same place, but further on. And not only, and also the idea of the labyrinth, which is generally a rotary movement, but including oscillations, where you take one step forward and three back, or three forward and one back, but you're going towards a center which is in the center and is still, which you, and also, for example, every good Muslim goes to Mecca and turns around the Kaaba, and by turning around something, you attain to that still center. And not only in a geographical motion, but also the subtle energies of the body are described as rotating, spiraling around a central still source, the channel in the center of the body.
And the chakras are thought of as rotating
Themselves.
spirals.
Yes, yes, yes. Many dynamic systems have this rotary spiralic movement.
I should mention for our viewers who may not know that the chakras are considered subtle organs that are part of the energy field around each person, often associated with the glands, with the endocrine glands.
Yes.
So you began looking at the origin of things, and undoubtedly you came across the biblical quote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God," and so on.
One of the things I said that it came about visually, the thing that started me with my work on sound was that I saw a film made by a follower of Rudolf Steiner, a man called Hans Jenny. And what he'd done was he had found a way of getting different kinds of matter, whether fine particles or sand or liquids of various viscosities. And what he did was he put them on plates which he then vibrated through sound. And as you watch the film, you see that there are these amorphous lumps and piles and heaps and films. And then the sound is introduced, different sounds with each one. And then, almost miraculously before your eyes, you see these amorphous heaps transforming and differentiating out into the most exquisite patterns that you see on the backs of butterflies, on shells, in the patterns of sand, and all around you. And this, as I saw this happening, I realized that there was something in all these stories about the beginning as a sonorous event. And the one, as you say, the one in the West is "in the beginning was the Word."
I just might mention for clarification, you brought up the name Rudolf Steiner, who was the founder of the Anthroposophy movement, an Austrian mystic whose current center is in Switzerland. And he, I think, refers to the etheric forces as being a kind of subtle vibration which creates the form in the physical world, that it starts in a more subtle world than the physical and moves into the physical.
Yes, yes.
So these patterns that Hans Jenny was reporting and showing in the film that you saw would seem, I suppose, from their point of view, to represent some sort of subtle energy made manifest in the physical world.
Yes, a kind of densification of the vibrations, yes.
And it's interesting, the anthroposophists themselves pay a lot of attention to sound. They feel that with our voices we manipulate these etheric energies, is their term for it.
Yes.
And they've developed systems of speaking and systems of dance based on pronunciation of different words. I know from my experience with the Waldorf schools, which is their school system, that they teach young children as they grow up the sounds of the alphabet, not just the letters, but the sort of the subtle meaning of a soft t or a hard t. Like that, it has some kind of a creation-like quality.
Yes, yes. Yes, I mean, I think it's one of the few movements who have taken this into account in the modern day. The traditions of sound existed in Egypt, in all the great civilizations, in Egypt, and then from Egypt into Greece, some of it at least, if not all. certainly not all, and then in China, of course, and in India. And so all the great civilizations had very sophisticated doctrines and philosophies and metaphysics of sound, and saw it as the creative principle in the world, and one which was very important to understand and very important to be in tune with.
Now, you worked extensively with the great electronic musician Karlheinz Stockhausen, didn't you? Really exploring the frontiers of the creative uses of sound.
Yes, this was very important to me. Although my mother was a musician, she a concert pianist. I was brought up in a house of grand pianos and music. I never studied music in a formal way early on, and that was for me a very fortunate thing, because later when I came to work with Stockhausen, I had a much more radical understanding of the whole of the principles of sound itself, because he in the 50s had been one of the first people to work with electronic music, and this was before synthesizers. And so in order to do this, he had to take pieces of magnetic tape and chop them up and stick them together with a sellotape almost. And so in order to do this, he had to understand the very components of sound itself. And so in the work that I did with him, I came to understand the very principles of sound, and this is essential for the work that I'm doing.
Then you worked quite extensively with Tibetan masters of chanting.
Yes, that was later. One of the things which is perhaps interesting to say here, one of the things that I did with Stockhausen, he'd been commissioned by the city of Liège to write a piece of music, and so we decided to make it. We were both very interested at that time, this was in 1971-72, in the effect of sound on matter, and so we thought it would be very interesting to actually create a piece which demonstrated this in as many ways as we could. So the piece had a number of musicians, and each of these, we designed various tasks, and then the musicians selected which task they wanted to do, and each of them researched the best way to do it, and then the piece was the demonstration. And the public, it was in a half-built television studio in the city of Liège, and the public were ambulatory. They would come around, and whenever anything interesting was happening, they'd come and listen and watch. And then when they got bored with that, they'd go off and to do something else. And some of the kind of instructions were show the effect of sound in powder, show the effect of sound in water or in flame, show the effect of mantra on the subtle body, show the effect of eliminate sound with sound, or eliminate form with sound, or show the effect of prayer on matter and so on. And I was working with another girl, and we were showing the effect of prayer on matter. So we got some dough, and we kneaded the dough, and then we chanted and mantrified into one half and not into the other half. And then we put it in the oven. And then as soon as the oven door opened, everybody smelt it and came over and found it very interesting and tasted it. So we gave them the taste test. And then I had a pendulum and tested to see whether it was possible to tell which had been prayed into. But perhaps the most interesting of all was somebody who wanted to show how the sound of a thing is the key to its own dissolution. So what he did, he wanted to break glass with sound. This is something which is a kind of, everyone wants to do it with the wine glass, but you have to have such a good quality wine glass that nobody quite wants to spare it. So what he did, he got a siren, which is a mechanical device for changing the pitch of a note continuously, and he got a very large pile of sheets of glass, and he would take a piece of glass and he bolted it onto the siren, and then he would move the pitch. And then he poured some water onto the top of the glass until it just had a thin film on the top. And then he continued, and he found that at certain points, this transparent film of water differentiated out into a kind of cellular pattern of the nodal lines of the glass. And then he continued, and it went, disappeared again, and it came again, and kept coming, going, coming, going. And he realized that it came at the overtones, or the harmonics of the fundamental note of the glass itself. So he then found the note of the glass, went back to the note of the glass, and then he called it worrying it. He worried it, which meant he went slightly above the note and slightly below the note. And it broke. And then everyone breathed again, and he got another sheet of glass and started all over again. So he broke many pieces of glass.
It reminds me of the story that you hear that bridges can actually collapse if you have soldiers or a group of people marching over, and if the rhythm of their marching is in the right harmonic of the frequency, the sound frequency of the bridge, it can cause it to collapse.
Yes, yes.
So sound is an incredibly powerful force
Yes.
in that regard.
Yes. Yes, it is.
It's this power that must interest you.
Yes. Well, then as you mentioned, I'd been very interested in the voice because I realized that although I love to listen to opera and there's something wonderful about a Western trained voice, I still felt that this wasn't quite, that somehow the point had been missed, that there wasn't an awareness in the training of a Western bel canto singing voice of what that voice did to the person who was making it, or what it did to the people who were listening to it. And so I did a lot of research to try and find out, listening to the music of different cultures all over the world, to try and find out what other ways there were of using the voice, of making sound, where that knowledge might still be present, where it wasn't just to make a very elegant sound, but a sound that really had some effect. And so for a long time I was listening to all the different kinds of vocal possibilities.
This is what led you to the Tibetan work, I presume.
Yes, it was when I discovered the Tibetan that it all made sense suddenly. All the work that I'd been doing up to then fell into place. I began to study with a Tibetan Lama and have been for 10 years or so now. And I discovered then they have a highly sophisticated understanding of the mind. There is no other tradition that still has intact a precise understanding of the way the mind works, that if you do this, then that happens, if you do that, then this happens, or that, and not that. And they know almost every word in the Tibetan language is some qualification of mind. And they understand the importance of the voice. And in fact, they divide the human being into three, into body, into voice, and mind. Body, everything physical, mind, the great mind, all the spiritual, and they see the voice as being that which coordinates the two.
The voice is the link between the physical and the spiritual.
Yes.
It makes sense in a way. The voice is so intimately connected with the breath. It's so present and at the same time so intangible.
Yes, yes. It partakes of physical and non-physical, and this is its secret. And so I realized that that there were ways of using the voice which were one of the easiest ways of transforming and becoming clear, entering into a state of clarity and emptiness, being present, which we needed to have available to us.
We typically use our voices, I suppose, for naming things or for conversing, and rarely do we emphasize the voice as a way of being in the world.
Well, this is something which is very unique to here and now, and this is really one of the main reasons that I use it. Tradition, in every other tradition, every other time, people came together at particular moments, moments when the sun and moon were in a certain relationship with the earth. They would come together to their sacred place, their local magical hill or stream or tree or wherever was the sacred place. They would come there, and they would come there with their family, with their tribe, with their neighbors, their close villagers, whoever. And at these important moments in time, they would tune together. And they would tune, first of all, they would tune themselves by chanting so that they remained healthy. They would tune themselves in relation to their close associates, neighbors, friends, and relatives. In other words, the people that they lived with, worked with. They would then tune all of those in relation to the time, in relation to the place, and most important of all, in relation to the divine.
Sort of like an orchestra tuning up, preparing to play.
Absolutely. No, very different. Not preparing to play another time, but playing now in this place. That's the main difference. What we do now is we come together to practice for another time for other people to listen to us playing somebody else's music, which has no relation to the divine, has no relation to the place, and we are rehearsing for something else.
In other words, it would be as if people came to a concert to hear the orchestra tune up. That would be the concert.
Exactly. And they would tune with the orchestra in the place. And the place they came to would, and the time they came, would all be part of it.
That, it sounds so intriguing and yet so alien at the same time.
It's not alien. From between 900 and 1600 AD, all over Christendom, the entire Christian world, at exactly the same time, went to their sacred places because they were then assimilated into Christianity. All the sacred moments were assimilated to the festivals of Christianity. They would come together, they would tune up the whole Christian world, singing exactly the same hymns, chanting the same psalms, intoning the same prayers at the same moment for 700 years.
And we lost that.
We stopped when humanism was democratized, when God was declared dead, when the mother became dead matter. We lost it. People stopped going to church, and whatever you may think about going to church, that was the way it had come to be in the Western world. And since the war, this is practically non-existent. It's maintained by choirs and the priests, but the people, most of the people, especially in Europe, don't go anymore.
Now, how does one use sound to attune with one's own body?
Oh, there are many ways of doing that. And in a way, any form of singing does that, and that's why any form of singing is good. But there are very specific ways of doing it, and that depends what you...
This is what you teach
Yes.
in your workshops.
Right.
You've developed some methods yourself of chanting with the Tibetans. Creating unusual resonances is quite remarkable. I've heard you, and I hope you'll share some of this with us a little later, but perhaps you could talk about it for a moment, and just what it is that you're able to do.
Yes. Well, there are many parameters of sound which you can use. Sound is one of the basic parameters of sound is first, sound is the interruption of the continuity of our experience, and that is one such.
Yes.
If I do that a few times, you get rhythm. If I go beyond 16 cycles a second, you get a pitch. The greatest is duration, when a piece starts and when it ends. So in the West, it's usually 20 minutes. In Japan, it's 2 seconds or 2 weeks. So we're very mediocre. Then the subtlest of all is the harmonics of the sound itself, which is the internal structure of the sound. And so one of the things I try and do with people is not to play out in time and space and permutate rhythm and pitch and so forth, but which is what the West has specialized in and is exquisitely
like a tune.
perfect. Yeah, exactly, or a symphony. Or
so what you do is not a tune.
No. What I do, well, it is, in a way it is a tune, but it's not that kind of a tune. What it is, it's to take one sound with no rhythm, with no melody, just one pitch, and to go into the very heart of that pitch so that you hear what that pitch is, so that you reveal its very nature. In other words, you hear that which sound is made of.
The essence of the pitch.
And the essence of the pitch is more like light than sound, almost. And in fact, it's called color in the language of acoustics.
Really? Can you demonstrate that for us? Okay. Marvelous. It's remarkable. That is a Tibetan.
No, that
No?
is actually Mongolian.
A Mongolian.
The two places where you find what is called harmonic or also overtone chanting, where there is one fundamental note and you hear the overtones as loudly or sometimes more loudly than this fundamental note, are Tibet and Mongolia. And it seems to come from a common shamanic origin. And this is the Mongolian way.
I see. Well, I might mention, for benefit of the viewer, since I'm so close to the presence of it, it was very stimulating, and I experienced what I call synesthesia, which is sort of a visualization of that sound. It was as if you were in the center of this very elaborate kind of op art mandala with black and red checkered patterns kind of radiating out from you. It seemed to kind of resonate in waves with the sound pattern.
Yes.
I guess this kind of an experience is not uncommon.
No, it does seem to have a very profound and a very healing effect. What's actually happening in terms of the acoustics of the sound is that you're hearing just as if I took white light and put it through a prism, so you would see the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah.
With this, I take sound and put it through the equivalent of acoustical prism, a selective resonator, and revealing the rainbow colors which make up the sound. And this is the subtlest aspect of sound that there is.
The subtlest aspect of sound.
Almost so subtle that you feel you're moving into the realm of light.
Well, Jill Purce, it's been a pleasure having you with me. We've really been able to talk about sound and form and into the etheric or the subtle essence, the way in which this kind of sound creates us as we exist today. Thank you very much for being with me.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you very much for being with us.